Okay, well, welcome. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Mia Pisano. I'm a volunteer with BARC, and if you've been to any BARC events in the last year or two, you have experienced the historical accountability practice that we begin each of our meetings and activities with. And so I'm gonna start that practice now. While our organization was founded by white Americans in the lineage of settler colonial environmentalism, BARC now recognizes that the status quo approach to conservation work is embedded in the white supremacist legacy of colonization, land theft, cultural erasure, genocide, and the systemic use of law to suppress Native sovereignty over their homelands. We now understand that BARC's dedication to protecting the stolen lands, now referred to as the public lands of Mount Hood National Forest, carries with it this paradox, which continues to be ignored by most conservation groups and which continues to harm Indigenous peoples today. For example, in our advocacy and policy work, BARC's interactions with federal agencies tend to recognize the so-called authority of the US federal government. This authority was constructed through the legalized displacement and genocide of Indigenous peoples and cultures, including through the legislative creation of public lands. These crimes and injustices have not been reconciled or rectified. Today, all non-Native people have the privilege of primary access to these public lands as a direct result of this strategy of legalized supremacy and the exclusion of Native peoples from their homelands in the name of public good. BARC recognizes that conservation organizations like ours are often complicit in the ongoing displacement of Native peoples and cultures, each time settlers and other non-Indigenous peoples claim the benefits of access to this land without acknowledging this context and by engaging in the paradox of protecting stolen land. Such an acknowledgement is the necessary first step in this revolutionary cultural work. We ask our community to practice humility, respect, and apology with us by personally dedicating your time, energy, action, and resources to support the peoples who rightfully belong to this land. Our staff, board, and volunteers are expected to commit to accountable relationships between our organization and Indigenous communities. Now, I would like to respectfully yield the mic to any Native people here today to speak freely, if you would like to. BARC affirms that these are the rightful homelands of the Multnomah, Molalla, Kalapuya, Chinook, Clackamas, Tenino, Wasco, Wishram, Paiute, and the many other Native peoples who live here and who have always lived here, who have always belonged to and cared for this land, and whose bold resistance to colonial oppression should guide us all. I'll now ask everyone here tonight who is not Indigenous to these lands to take part in a guided practice of accountability, which we call for, our acknowledgement practice. For our Indigenous guests, please feel free to take a break and rejoin us in about 5 minutes. We deeply appreciate your patience and honor the hundreds of years of Indigenous resilience in the face of unparalleled oppression that brought you here today. BARC is committed to demonstrating authenticity, accountability, and reciprocity in our organizational relationships and expects the same from members of our community. Acknowledgement of the historical and social context we exist within is only the first step in this revolutionary cultural work. We ask all non-Indigenous participants in our work to practice accountability, humility, respect, and acknowledgement with us by personally dedicating your time, energy, action, and resources to support the people who rightfully belong to this land. If you have practiced acknowledgement with bark before, please get the notebook you use for this practice. If this is your first practice, please get something to write with. Take the next 2 to 3 minutes to write instructions, intentions, actions, and next steps for yourself, outlining how you will develop your practice of acknowledgement through action. If you have been at a recent bark event, you should have your writings from past events. Please revisit what you have set out for yourself to do. How have you made these intentions concrete? Take this time to reflect on your efforts and update your intention and action plan. Have you been accountable? What actions have you taken? What was the impact of these actions? What mistakes have you made? What will you do next? What actions are you committed to take to honor and make amends with the Indigenous people here tonight, across this continent, in the past, the present, and the future? I'm setting a timer for a few minutes for us to start our writing. At this time, you can finish up your writing. Again, if anyone from Native and Indigenous communities here tonight would like to speak or make a request or share in any way, now or at any time during the event, please let me know. I invite everyone to share in the chat one example of a meaningful, material, visible, and concrete action we can all do to support justice for Native peoples. Thank you all for supporting this important practice and learning. It is important that non-Native people continue to practice acknowledgement through action in all areas of our lives. To our Native guests, thank you for being here tonight, and we're grateful for your feedback and guidance regarding this acknowledgement practice and our programming in general. If there's anything you would like to add in closing this portion of our event, please feel free to do so now. Again, thank you everyone for joining us at the Grasshopper Comment Writing Workshop. I'm Mia Pisano, and I'm joined by BARC staff, Misha, and another BARC volunteer, Meg. And I'm glad you're all here tonight.
All right, so I'm going to start us off. We just did some introductions, so let's talk about NEPA. The National Environmental Policy Act was signed into law in 1970, and it basically supports two major purposes: ensuring that agencies consider significant environmental consequences of their proposed actions, and informing the public about their decision making, sort of allowing the public to make comments to make their voices heard about the environmental effects of things like logging and other activities. NEPA is not required to go with the most environmentally sound decision. They take a lot of like social and financial implications into their decisions as well. They don't decide which alternative or version is chosen. They don't prevent destructive projects from going forward. They don't guarantee public influence, which is where people like BARC and volunteers step in so that we can get the word out. And they don't generally prohibit anything. They just allow for this comment writing process to be undertaken. Any questions? Oh, shoot. Misha, sorry, I should say.
The slides weren't forwarding.
Sorry.
There we go.
There we go. Sorry about that. Forgot we were not connected here.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that I was forwarding the slides.
All right, so slide 11. All right, cool. So here's your like NEPA timeline, essentially. The first thing that will happen is the scoping letter is put out there by the agency that's going to complete this, whatever project it is. And that's when the public can start commenting on this project, whatever project it is. The second phase is the preliminary environmental assessment. There's a second 30-day comment period during that time. After that, they make a draft decision or a proposed action. And you can also comment during this time if you've commented in the previous comment periods. So it's really important to get comments kind of going as soon as possible. It's not only it allows you to continue commenting throughout the project proposal timeline, but it also, I think it's, oh yeah, next slide, actually. You can change the project, you can preserve the ability to sue, which is really important, because if you don't comment in the previous comment periods, then you lose your ability to sue about the project. You can gather information about the project throughout these like comment periods. And it's also a focus point for organizing the public. It can be, as I think we've all encountered probably, hard to get people really involved in something that's very nebulous. But when you have a timeline that's very clear, 30 days to do this, 30 days to do that, it's a lot easier to organize the public. Next slide. These proposed changes to NEPA were under Trump, and I believe they have all been canceled, luckily. But it is one of those governmental laws that is likely to be under attack if we have a future president that decides to do so. So it's always good to keep an eye on that. Next slide. And next one. Mia, do you want to take over, or you want me to keep going? Whatever's clever.
I'll talk. I can go for I'll go for a couple slides here. So what is a public comment? What are we talking about? It's not a letter to the editor. It's a participation in the NEPA process. It becomes a part of the public record, a part of the project records. And substantive comments can influence a project, but opinions really do not. So it's different from a letter to the editor in that where we can influence this project by presenting information or questions that have substance, but it's not about our opinion. Next slide, please. So this list of what can constitute a substantive comment, I find really helpful. I refer to this all the time. So a way to make substantive feedback is to do one of these things, and we should definitely have an acronym to help us remember these. If we can identify a different way to meet the stated purpose and need of the project, present new information, point out specific flaws, make factual corrections, or identify a different source of credible research. And in the next couple slides, we'll give examples of all of these. So we could go to the next. And what substantive comments are not is comments that regard a topic outside the project under review, or simply disagree with it without backing it up, or simply agreeing with it. None of those are substantive. Next slide. So the next set of examples are from BARC's scoping comments on the Zigzag project. And this is an example of a substantive comment that identifies a different way to meet the stated purpose and need of the project, and an example of language that's not substantive. Next slide. A comment that presents new information. Here's an example. Next slide. Here's an example of a comment that identifies a different source of credible research, which could cause changes to the project proposal. And when we're writing NEPA comments, sources from peer-reviewed journals are credible research. Pretty much anything else is not going to be considered credible by the agency. A comment that points out specific flaws in the analysis. And next slide. This is an example of a comment that makes factual corrections. Anyone here who has commented before? If you have any examples of comments or not substantive comments, you could unmute yourself and chime in or throw something in the chat. For folks who are here who haven't done comment writing before, we're definitely going to be packing a lot of information into this presentation, and you'll get a follow-up email with access to all of this. So there's going to be a lot of information, and don't try to feel like you have to remember it all right now. You'll have access to this. Okay, we can go to the next. And Meg, do you want to take over?
Sure. So one of the things to look for in project documents, the purpose and need statement. Each project, the Grasshopper project included, will include this, explaining basically why they're doing the project. Sometimes it's for fire reduction, fuel reduction, will kind of vary depending. Check out if the document uses the best available science. They will often echo chamber themselves and refer to themselves. And so it's always a good idea to look a little deeper and see if you can find out if the science that they're referring to is really the most up-to-date, best available science. Did the agency correctly describe the existing conditions? This is a classic reason why we want to go out and ground truth. A lot of times these agencies will kind of, again, refer to themselves or refer to the documents that they have and not actually get boots on the ground and see what it's actually like out there. Are there potential impacts that they did not address? This can be a really fun wormhole to go down if you're looking for cool peer-reviewed articles to look up. This is definitely a good way to bring important topics to the table that they might not have thought of. And are there statements that are legally or factually inaccurate or incomplete? This is another really good one to kind of make a really good statement in your comment letter. Slide. As far as organizing, you want to be, like Mia said, it's not a letter to the editor. You want to be very factual, very direct, very kind of no flowery poetic language here. Use descriptive headings to structure everything. Focus on cause and effect. If you say that, you know, X equals Y, you need to sort of back it up and clearly connect those dots. Support your statement, include photos, maps, GPS coordinates, anything that allows you to show them that it's a true and factual statement. Point out inadequacies. A lot of the newer science that they're using might be a little filled with holes if it's, you know, not maybe that new, or they fail to address an important issue or give adequate information on that. It's important to point out. And be efficient. Again, no flowery language in comment writing. Just be direct and succinct. Slide. BARC's comments on climate impacts. While the EA states that, quote, the scientist science has been considered along with the science cited in this report, that consideration is documented in the administrative record. We found nothing in the record to back up this assertion. As the Ninth Circuit recently found in a case regarding the crystal clear timber sale on Mountain Hood National Forest, quote, in its response to these comments, the USFS reiterated its conclusions about vegetation management, but did not engage with the substantial body of research cited by appellants. It's a really good example of the Forestry Service in this case not presenting the newest, most accurate science. And if we can find other ways to back up the assertion that we don't want them to do X, Y, and Z, then that's a really good way to push our comments forward. See, slide. Let's see. A project of this magnitude makes an infinitesimal contribution to overall emissions. Therefore, at the global and national scales, this proposed action's direct and indirect contributions to greenhouse gases and climate change would be negligible. In addition, because the direct and indirect effects will be negligible, the proposed action's contribution to cumulative effects on global greenhouse gases and climate change would also be negligible.
Meg, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, totally. I'm not sure if I should read all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot of text. So Mount Hood National Forest right now is not doing any carbon accounting, and it's just absent from the EA. And they need to be, they need to be doing carbon accounting. And in Bark's comments and myself, and I know other people who write comments, even though it's not in the purpose and need, even though they're really not addressing it, I think it's important that we keep pushing. And this slide just shows some of their copy paste language that they reuse about why they're not doing any carbon accounting or why they're not including carbon impacts. And it's complicated. It is really complicated, but that's not a reason to not do it. So if this is something that's important to you, then even though it's outside of the scope of this project, I think that there's value in including it and letting them know that it's important to people.
Let me chime in that even though if they want to consider it not part of the project, but there still is, since Zigzag, there was the executive's order that the 8 federal agencies will consider climate as part of their work. So I kind of feel like they should be addressing it because of if for no other reason, the executive order was explicit that agencies should be considering it as well. So bringing that up.
Thanks, Steve. Next slide. Oh, can we go back one? Yeah, there we go. So these documents are long and they're full of supporting information, and you can really wonk out. There's a lot to read, but you don't have to read the entire document because, you know, it takes a long time to become an expert. It takes a long time to even become informed enough. So you don't have to read the entire document. You don't have to focus on, you know, you don't have to comment on everything. But for, you know, for each individual, focus on what's important to you or what you have, you know, knowledge about, and then just zero in on that. And, you know, if you can make one point and make it strong, that has a lot more impact than, you know, doing a little bit of a lot of things. And don't rant. Resist the urge, and also keep in mind that the Forest Service they're following the forest management plans, management directives. Like, they're getting told from the congressional level what to do. They have to meet these congressionally determined timber targets. They're under political pressures. And these are individual people who are writing and reading these projects, and they're people who I get to know. And you know, they're people, and they are trying to do a good job. And I just really urge all of us participants to keep in mind that these are people. And so here are some links to the projects and these resources, and you'll all get this in your follow-up email. Does anybody have any questions right now?
If it's helpful too, we have about 10 minutes left for this section, so we can either move on to the next one, or we could also look at some of those examples. Yep.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions about this part? I know that some of the folks in this meeting have a lot of experience with this. Other folks I haven't met before. So if you have any questions about this NEPA section of the presentation, let's spend a little time with that.
The only thing I'll chime in on, and I mean, this relates to the climate section, but also really to just their own evaluation of impacts for the treatments itself. But it's just the whole concept of death by 1,000 cuts. They never think, you know, that their project has any impact because it's always looked at a vacuum and not either the context of what previous work projects had been applied within the same project area, and what assertions were made from the previous project, and how does the new project impact that. Like where they, for example, in this current project, they say, oh, well, we anticipate that the habitat will return in 70 to 100 years, but just 30 years ago, they had a thinning project. So they didn't even, give it the 70 or 100-year time frame to recover. So I don't know, that's one thing I struggle with, which is trying to overcome the cumulative effects and their denial of it.
I think that'd be a really good focal point if you wanted to kind of make it a project to make a comment letter about that. I mean, that could make a pretty convincing argument if you went back and found, the scientific findings from the Forestry Service, from other people, compiled that to sort of like break apart their vacuum to illuminate the bigger picture. I think that'd be pretty compelling. Be a good focus for a comment letter. Anyone else? Questions?
Going once, going twice. Well, should we jump into the specifics of Grasshopper? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Are you seeing the Grasshopper slides? No. Okay, hang on a second. Okay, is that the Grasshopper? Great.
That's it.
Okay, great. So the Grasshopper project area is on the east side of Mount Hood. It's in the Barlow Ranger District. It is kind of in between the Badger Creek Wilderness and the Mount Hood Wilderness, and it's surrounded by a national recreation area, and then the 48 road on the side. Do you see my cursor? Sorry, I don't do Zoom that often. Okay, so yeah, okay, so the 48 road is here, and then what Steve was just talking about, cumulative impact, we can see that here, where here's this proposal, and then here's the Rocky project, which might still be ongoing, but is pretty recent. And then over here is the South Penn. So it's surrounded by other projects, there are other impacts that are taking place all around it, which is part of this cumulative impact. So the purpose and need of Grasshopper, if you look at many of these projects, I was struck at the beginning when I started looking at these of like, wait, why aren't they ever called a timber sale? I thought, like, where does it say timber sale? But these are all packaged as, forest health treatments or restoration treatments. So the purpose and need is to improve the health and vigor of forested stands. So that's the framing. There's a need to reduce risks associated with high intensity wildfires, to protect and enhance wildlife habitat. That's a really interesting aspect of this project that's going to be impacting a lot of northern spotted owl habitat, and to contribute to a sustainable supply of timber and other forest products. So that's where the timber targets come in. The agency is told by Washington, D.C. how many million board feet they have to get a year. So this is like the first statement in the EA that will kind of lay out what the idea is of this project. So this project is being framed as having a large component of addressing the issue of fire. And talking about fire in forests is really complicated. And I hope I can bring a little bit of clarity to it, but I won't be able to make it simple because it's not simple. Part of what complicates this project is that it stretches many miles from west to east and goes through a whole lot of different forest types, from up here where it is up against the Badger Creek Wilderness. This is what's described as a cold moist forest. This is over 5,000 feet elevation. There's mountain hemlocks. There's some subalpine fir in here. This is all, it's considered a west side moist mixed conifer. And then as we go east and as we go down, it becomes drier and drier and drier. And out here is a totally different forest type. We're into ponderosa pine and even pine and oak. So it's a really, really broad planting area over a lot of different forest types. And what this map is showing is the fire regime condition class. And I'll try to explain that. This is an analysis of how far this forest is out of what would have been its historic fire regime. So how this landscape would have historically been impacted by fire. And the areas that are in green have been mapped, and this is from the Forest Service Fuels Specialist report. So the areas that are in green are described as being in fire regime condition class 1, which means that they're within their historic range. So for that forest type and elevation, how would that area have been historically interacting with fire? And if it's in the green, that means that it's within its historic range. So it either like over here, on the west area in this moist mixed conifer, these areas historically would have had infrequent stand replacing fires, so infrequent large fires, and that area is considered to be within its fire regime, more or less, and that can be treated with prescribed burning. If it's in the yellow, then that's fire regime condition class 2, which means it's moderately altered from how it historically would have interacted with fire. It might have missed one fire event. And in these areas, to restore it to like historical fire conditions, it can be treated with hand treatments or mechanical treatments, or with prescribed fire, or with some combination. And then areas in red are considered to be, they're departed from their fire regime by multiple intervals. So they've missed multiple cycles of fires that they should have had, or they've been impacted more frequently than would have been historic. And in these areas, if they've missed multiple fire return intervals, then the prescription will be to first treat them mechanically before they can be treated with prescribed burning, before they can be treated with fire. Any questions before we go on? Awesome, you understand it. It's hard for me to understand sometimes. The part that's hard to understand is the so what, like what's the significance of that? And that's where I loop back to saying, like, you can't comment on the whole document. Pick one part, pick one thing that's important. And so if you're going to zero in on fire, this is a good place to start. Oops. Okay, so this map is showing us, it's showing us some of the land allocations, and land allocations are like the zoning of national forest. And the purple outline shows us the whole area. The blue stripes those are around waterways that are classified as riparian reserves, which the project contains pretty extensive prescriptions of how they're proposing to treat within those riparian reserves. These dark green blobs are late seral reserves, and those are areas that have like old growth characteristics and are supposed to be managed that way, managed for developing those late seral, like old complex structure places where northern spotted owls can live. And then this big green blob over here is part of the national recreation area, and there's rules and restrictions about what can and can't be done there. And let's see. So this is showing us more land allocations, and this is from the Mount Hood Forest Plan. So Mount Hood National Forest has two overlapping or overlaying sets of land allocations, one from the Northwest Forest Plan and one from the Mount Hood Forest Plan. And these are ways that the land like gets described in these plans. And the largest component that we see, the C1, that's timber emphasis. That's land that, like, the management directive is to manage that for timber production. And then I thought we had a slide of Northwest Forest Plan. Okay. And, interrupt me anytime with a question, or if you want me to go back and explain something. So this map is showing the record that the Forest Service has of past harvest in these areas. And so you can see, and this is something that is what Steve was talking about cumulative impact, that a lot of these areas have been logged or have had some logging in the last 30 years, 40 years. When it gets back, farther, then it's a little bit more speculative. And in some of these areas, so here I'm going to draw my cursor, draw your attention over to this far northwest corner here. Like this little blob here is a unit that in the planning documents is described as a plantation. And there's been some logging there like a long time ago, but in no sense is it a plantation. So this this map is, it's a starting place for information, but it's really helpful to have gone out there and to see what it looks like on the ground. So here's an aerial view, and it's really interesting to toggle between these two, right? Of like, what are they saying was was happening and was done there, and then what's an aerial view showing. So we can see some of these big blocks that look like they were pretty heavily logged not too long ago. Got some nice snow cover there. Okay, so this project has two proposed alternatives. And let's see. And this alternative is the one that proposes a shelterwood treatment. And shelterwood is what's in this vertical stripey. You can see the vertical stripey units here. And shelterwood is would look a lot like a clear cut, but we're not going to call it a clear cut because they get really annoyed when we call it a clear cut, because it's not a clear cut, but it would look a lot like a clear cut. And the rationale for proposing this alternative, and it's right there in the draft EA, is twofold. One is because it would produce more timber. And the other is, here's the idea, is that this road here is the 4860 road, and it goes up to Badger Lake. And it goes up into the Badger Lake wilderness, and this road just completely sucks. But Badger Lake is really popular. Lots of people go back there. People use this area a lot. It's great up here. But down here and off to the east, in those communities, those people who live there, those communities, and the infrastructure that's in here, there's an irrigation ditch that comes through here. They don't like the idea of a big fire coming from the west side, coming over. This is a ridge here, coming over the ridge, coming down to their communities. And I don't blame them for not liking the idea of a big fire coming toward their houses. And so this Shelterwood proposal, the idea is here to make a fire break and to make a place to be able to stage fire suppression activities. And the fire break here would basically clear cut oh wait, I'm not supposed to say clear cut, would heavily log a strip along the road and make so that firefighting operations could get into Badger Lake if they needed to get in, to get people out, to stage their fire suppression activities from here, and also to take out a lot of timber. So that's the Shelterwood proposal. It's alternative 2. It's not the first alternative. So the proposals have the same number of acres, but the alternative 1 is the alternative that does not include shelterwood harvest. It instead includes more acres of variable density thinning from below. And so it's the same number of acres, about 5,280, with part of that being sapling thinning. And sapling thinning is it's kind of what it sounds like. That's not where commercial timber harvest is coming from. Commercial timber harvest is coming from this intermediate commercial thinning and variable density thinning from below. And then in this second alternative, it's also coming from shelterwood. And this is probably the wonkiest slide we have here. If I were like new to comment writing and I saw this slide, I think like my brain would melt, because there's just like so many things to consider, but you can come back to this and consult this. This is also this is in the project documents, but this is just laying out the differences of what the land use allocations are in the Mountain Hood National Forest and the forest plan for alternative 1, which is without the Shelterwood, and then alternative 2 with the Shelterwood. So this is showing how many acres of what land allocation are being proposed to be treated in what way. Does that make sense? Tell me if it doesn't make sense. I have to drink a sip of water real quick. Okay, so this is another part of every proposal is what's going to happen with the roads. And this proposal includes some really small amount of changes in roads that are considered part of the system roads. And the project also proposes to build approximately 17 miles of temporary roads. But that's a lot of temporary roads that have not been shown on the map, even in theory. And this is happened before on projects on the east side of Mount Hood, that the Forest Service is not disclosing even generally where they're proposing to put temporary roads. And honestly, they're being pretty cagey about it. And they're saying like, well, you know, we just don't know until it's being implemented, like where the roads will actually go, because it just depends on so many things. To which we've said, if it depends on so many things, how did you come up with a number 17 miles? Like they know where in general they think they might put roads. And if you want to go down the rabbit hole of talking about roads are a big issue because they have a huge impact on all kinds of things, on wildlife corridors, on sedimentation streams, on the spread of undesired plants. And calling a road a temporary road, it doesn't mean that it goes away. It doesn't go away unless it is actively decommissioned and then rehabilitated. And then it still takes a long time to go away, but then it will go away. So I think it's really fair for people to make a stink about where are the temporary roads. And by make a stink, of course, I mean, write substantive comments on the issue of temporary roads. All right, that slide just shows us land allocations again and again. And okay, so now we get into the topic of owls. And this is one of the issues with this project, is that, as you can see from this map, this whole area is used in some way or other by spotted owls, either for dispersal, which is like where they can go and look around and potentially make a new nest or go hunting there. And then suitable habitat, and then critical habitat is like what's their prime real estate. And so this shows an overlay of the units with the spotted owl habitat. And this project does propose to impact spotted owl habitat, which is noteworthy. And I'm going to move into now showing some pictures of some specific areas in the project, particularly to talk about this Shelterwood proposal. So on the left side, this is zeroed in on the west side of the project. And the pink here is what's part of the Shelterwood proposal. And this is the 4860 road that goes up into Badger Creek Wilderness. This map is from the scoping, which is the first round of the proposal. And so this is an area that's showing you right here. This is unit 62. This has had it's had past treatment, and this is how it has grown back. And how it's grown back is in a really flammable state. This is like really thick, dense, brushy. A lot of this is grand fir. I'm not seeing lodgepoles. Oh yeah, right here in front of me, lodgepole pines. So one of the issues with this proposing to make a Shelterwood fire break is what's going to happen in the long run with it, because in the long run, if it's not maintained as a fire break, it's going to turn into this. And this is the opposite of a fire break. And this is what these untreated areas look like right next door. So this is unit 223, and these are mountain hemlocks and true firs. This is at about like just under 5,000 just under 5,000 feet elevation. The snow area in the background, that's the road right there. So this is like a before and then like 20 years after of this area. This is up at almost the top of the proposal. This is at about 5,000 feet, 5,100 feet elevation. It's in some of these areas, there's been a tiny bit of thinning, but it's mostly has never been logged. Big mountain hemlocks, big true firs, suitable owl habitat. And this is unit 95, which is this giant unit over here. And this burned 30 years ago. And is like, we didn't really walk through it because you can't walk through it because it's so thick with lodgepole pines. So this is, again, an example of like, this is the opposite of a fire break. And this is some more of that where it's growing back. This is like closer to the edge of it, not out in the middle so much. So it's got some shade. So there's some hemlocks coming back in. And then this is an area that's described as a plantation. There's so much high elevation wildlife activity out here. There's Clark's nutcrackers out here. And yeah, it's pretty nice. Okay, so now this is really interesting, back to the fire break question, the Shelterwood question. So this is in this mountain hemlock, high elevation. This was thinned sometime around the 1980s. We can see the stumps here. But it has not grown back into that super thick, brushy lodgepole pine opposite of a fire break. And these trees here, they, these are still like, these are good size for mountain hemlocks. These are big old trees for mountain hemlocks. And the first alternative one, proposes to do something that looks more like this in these areas, which keeps this high elevation mountain hemlock much more intact than the Shelterwood proposal. Okay, so this jumps down, we've jumped down now to a way lower elevation. And this is one of the areas that's that's described as a plantation. And that is being proposed for thinning. And this is a really special unit that gets its own special slide. This lake right here, if you can see my cursor, this is Boulder Lake. It's like the best swimming lake on earth. And this is just up the road. This unit's described as a plantation, and there was some logging up by the road, and it's grown back pretty thick, but down lower, it's a wet meadow. This is a carnivorous plant. These are these super cool, I forget their name, but it's a wet meadow full of wildflowers. And this is a really good example of a substantive comment that presents specific information. Oh, elephant's head. Thanks, Misha. That's called elephant's head. Yeah, so a substantive comment that presents specific information, factual information. So these photos tell a really different story than the map that shows, oh, this is a 40-year-old plantation. And so here's another photo from a unit this is multi-age. This is labeled as a plantation. And then this is one of the riparian areas here on 3 Mile Creek. And I'm not a riparian area expert, and there's always good reason to be really concerned about logging around fish-bearing streams and around streams that feed into fish-bearing streams. And I've spent some time looking at the project development criteria for the riparian areas. And that's their really specific directions about what they're going to do in the riparian areas. And it seems pretty thoughtful. Again, I'm not an expert. And so I hope someone who is an expert is going to take a really good look and do some really good substantive comments on things that I might not know to look for, which is why it's important that, we get as much public engagement as we can. And one of the things that the public can provide is information that the Forest Service might not have, such as, for example, that this tributary, which is mapped as intermittent, was flowing water in August. Here's another riparian unit. And here, see this critter that's been identified as a Cope's giant salamander. And this is in this intermittent stream. Okay, now this is a great story I have to tell you. So here's a tree so big that the forester's tape couldn't measure it. And that was in Unit 192. Which is an LSR area, late Seral Reserve. And this was the first ground truthing that we did out in Grasshopper back in 2019 during the scoping period. And based on the scoping comments that individuals and BARC submitted, both of these units, 170 and 192, were dropped from the project. Yay. And this shows really just how diverse this project area is. This is a unit looking right down to 3 Mile Creek, and these are big ponderosas, and it was really hot. And it's just such a diverse project area. Another, let's see, this was back up on the creek, another big tree. This is an area where it's had a previous Shelterwood and then prescribed burn underneath. This is another previously thinned unit. Another previously thinned. And
I'll jump in and talk
Yeah.
about those thinned units for a second.
please
Or
do.
why those are, yeah, I think so. One of the reasons that we've included some of those pictures is because what we found when we were walking through it is that a lot of the areas that are scheduled or proposed to have a variable density thinning. I've already had a thinning pretty recently. So you can see here, there's like just a lot of big trees. We're not seeing a lot of things growing in. And so one of the questions that we have is, well, what are you going to take? Or what is that variable density thinning like once you do that? What is that going to look like for these areas? Is this not the desired outcome already? Yep.
Thanks, Misha. Yeah, that's another, like, it's another question where you could go down the rabbit hole of reading all of the proposed silvicultural treatments and how many stems per acre and are going to be left, and what's the canopy cover going to be, and also asking the question in the comments in a substantive way of, in these units proposed for variable density thinning that have been thinned within the last 20 years, describe the desired future conditions and how they're not already being met. Yeah, thanks, Misha. So I'm going to stop that screen share unless anybody wants me to go back to another picture.
Mia, sorry, so I got off mute just after you stopped sharing, but there's kind of that a circle on some of those maps, and I forget what was dropped.
Oh yeah,
and yeah, I was wondering
that circle right there. Let me go back to it.
Yeah, that one. Yeah,
that one. That's a spotted owl nest range right there.
They identified a nest and so put a buffer in, or
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's two of those. So over here, these are these two units, 170 and 192, and I think there's another nest in there. Yeah, you can kind of see how it's like, you can see the curve of the circle. So this has like, here's the nest range here with the rest of the unit kind of drawn around it. Yeah, so that's what those two excluded areas are. Okay, so we have time for questions. Or conversation.
Hi. This is totally new to me, and I'm a financial supporter of BARC. And I am reading Jane Goodall, and she's inspiring me to get more active, and everything that's happening in the world is so disheartening. It's just like, oh my God. So I just want to learn. I have to bring my focus in, if I'm going to do any activism, I want it to be local, because this is where I live. And so I'm going to ask a couple of real basic questions about the process. So the federal government gives the Oregon Forestry Department certain requirements for lumber, for providing lumber for the economy. I think the two probably work closely together. The lumber industry needing lumber to continue existing, and the federal government somehow has people that figure out how much they need to keep subsisting, you know? Is that an accurate way of looking at it?
Well, I've never spent any time staring into the black box of where timber targets come from. Steve, do you know anything about the black box of how timber targets are generated?
Not specifically, but I seem to recall in the past that these were arbitrary numbers that were tied to the forest supervisor's performance. You know, that they were given goals in order to, you know, be considered performing or, you know, in their duties. But where those numbers come from is still a black box for me.
Oh, that's interesting, you know, because it's like, how come? You know, how come they need that much board timber, you know? And then they have to figure out where, you know, where they're going to get that from, and sort of, it's like proving their existence, you know, they have to prove their existence or they won't exist anymore. Okay. So it is what it is, and we're here to make sure that things aren't harmed any more than they have to be. Does that sound kind of accurate? What BARC's function is to prevent harm as much as possible.
In this capacity of comment writing, there is some trying to like manipulate or prevent harm in these timber sales. But there's other capacities of BARC too that are working on more of the advocacy of trying to change the forest plan and working for like some of those bigger, like before the plans or projects actually get planned, trying to change that. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Fremont Hood committee that works on that. Yeah, Mia or anyone else, do you have more to add on that?
Well, I was going to talk about that a little bit because the management directive for how Mount Hood National Forest is managed comes from the Northwest Forest Plan and the Mount Hood Forest Plan, and those were written in the 1990s and have had amendments, but have not been updated. And so BARC's Fremont Hood Committee, that's the specific work of that committee, which is it's at the other end of the spectrum of, you know, being engaged with forest advocacy, for advocating for changing the laws, changing the, you know, what the management directives are. And then this goes really to the ground level of commenting on specific projects.
And
Okay.
I'll throw in a couple extra cents, and I'll try not to overwhelm you because some of the examples would be kind of deep in the weeds, but from a general perspective, it's also to try and hold the Forest Service accountable for, you know, what are their guidelines and what they're supposed to do. For example, they are supposed to do surveys for sensitive species that might be in a project area, one of which is a food source for spotted owls, the red tree vole, which is a little rat-like creature. And for a different project that's come up and been mentioned, Zigzag, the Forest Service did some surveys. They found a few, but there is kind of a another group that goes out and does surveys. They've done all the training that's required of the Forest Service staff. So if they find examples of this creature, their records are considered valid, and so the Forest Service has to, you know, incorporate that. And so with Zigzag, this volunteer organization went out, did additional surveys, and they found a lot more examples of this particular species. And so that forced the Forest Service to eliminate or reduce some of the units that were part of the Zigzag project. So again, it's some way to just keep them accountable for what they're obligated to do. And, you know, they may not because of staff resources or whatnot.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you for being here. I know this is really like trying to drink out of a fire hose. And I
It's
would-
good though. I really love how much work. I'm impressed with how much information you've gathered and how much you have in your head about it. So good presentation to begin with. And yeah, it's
Good. Yeah,
eye-opening. I just wanted to.
This is a group effort, Meg and Misha and I are here talking tonight, but this is definitely like, this is many, many people and many, many hours, those, the maps and photographs from, that we're showing from Grasshopper. There've been many campouts, probably thousands of hours of volunteer hours have been logged out there collecting that data and doing those surveys. So we're here talking tonight, but it's been lots of people participating. So really glad you're here tonight.
Yeah, I'm learning the process doesn't mean I'm going to be able to write a comment, because I don't know how much I could do. I like the fact that you said hone in on one particular thing that, and I've been reading a lot of things about the carbon sink, of trees, and it's just remarkable how much carbon the trees hold. So, that's about the only thing I know a little something about.
Can I share my screen and show you something else here? So when you go to the Forest Service project webpage, which there will be links to in the follow-up information. So this is the Grasshopper project, and you'll see these different tabs, and each of these tabs we've got maps. So all of the maps that I showed you, oh boy, we've got maps. We've got the draft environmental assessment. That's the EA. And that's the document that lays out this plan. Then there's an appendix that's project design criteria. That's like more details. There's the vegetation treatment table, roads treatment table. If you want to get really wonky, this is aquatic conservation strategies consistency. And then here's all of the information from scoping. So this was the scoping letter, which is this is the pre-proposal. And here were the maps that they released for scoping. And then these are ones that got changed. So these will show the units that got dropped. And then here are the comments, which become part of the public record. And here's mine, Pisano, that's me. And there's other BARC supporters here. And then here's BARC's organizational comments. Here's the AFRC, that's the American Forest Resources Council. So that's an industry group. Here's Oregon Wild's comments. So reading through comments is really interesting. And if you're sort of just dipping your toe into, this could keep you out of trouble for a while. Or get you into trouble, which depending on what you like. And then you can get into the specialist reports, and you can go for days reading these specialist reports.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information, and for anyone who really wants to make an issue about that proposed fire break, reading this fuels report here, it's dense, but there's a lot of information in there that it's really helpful to be able to know what they're talking about to write a substantive comment. So I just thought I'd show you how much fun it is to look at the project.
How do you find that? Where somebody sent something in a chat. Oh, that was for BARC's
It should be linked at the bottom of the PowerPoint that we just went through, which we're sending out in email version to everyone.
Oh, great. Okay.
At the very end, under resources and the comment training PowerPoint.
Okay.
We'll get that. So we're just about at time, and I really thank everyone for coming. If there are any more questions or conversation, I can certainly stick around.
I was just going to add to Rebecca that no doubt you'll feel overwhelmed about writing comments and coming up with comments, but that's okay. I mean, even those of us who have been doing it for a little while are still always feeling that same anxiety of, how do you address things and pull together your comments. So it's perfectly fine to feel overwhelmed. And so, the guidance about kind of looking at something more specific or smaller focus for your comments is okay, because you'll have other people chiming in. And so with that bigger audience of comments, hopefully everything gets more or less addressed.
Thank you.
Feel free to email me. I'm happy to help.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's really impressive. I really appreciate BARC
Well, thank you.
and the other groups as well.
I just want to call out that Steve wrote in the chat there, advice to visit BARC's YouTube page. We did a whole series of comment writing workshops for the Zigzag project also, where we did a little bit deeper dive into the NEPA process. And so those are fun. Once you read all the specialist reports, and if you still have interest, then you can go watch.
Is the Zigzag over with?
Zigzag has, yes. You want to take that one, Steve? You want to talk about Zigzag?
I can if you want.
Is it over? I mean,
well, the Forest Service has come to a decision for the project, so they have decided to proceed. But in the same token, they're in no hurry to proceed. So they've done their due diligence according to NEPA, and they've come to a decision. I think BARC had some concerns, and there was some mediation about some of those concerns. But that the project is kind of green lighted, but there's been no further action as far as I know.
yeah, because then they have to contract for the logging companies, and then I was wondering, do these logging companies really comply?
Well, post-logging monitoring is another thing BARC does.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and that's another area where we're having eyes on the having the eyes of the public on the agency for accountability. There's that's really important.
Yeah.
And so post-logging monitoring is part of that BARC does. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think, Misha, this would be a fine time to stop the recording.